Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hari ini kita akan membicarakan tentang Malik Bennabi. Siapa Malik Bennabi? Malik Bennabi adalah seorang penulis berkebangsaan Algeria. Malik Bennabi ini dikenal dengan tulisannya yang menyuarakan revolusi, ya, untuk masyarakat Muslim, Muslim society, bahwa Muslim harus bangkit, ya. Kita harus bangkit, kita harus kembali lagi ke Al-Quran, ya. Kita harus kembali lagi kepada Al-Quran, dan kita harus bangkit, kita harus percaya diri supaya kita bisa berdaya, kita bisa menjadi diri kita, ya. Muslim mempunyai identitas seperti masa-masa kejayaan Muslim dulu. Masa kejayaan Muslim tentunya kita sebagai umat Muslim sudah tahu bahwa Islam pernah mendominasi dunia melalui perdagangannya. Muslim menyebarkan agamanya tidak melalui perang, tapi dengan asimilasi kultur budaya, melalui perdagangan, melalui pertukaran jasa, barang dan jasa, melalui kegiatan-kegiatan yang lain yang selain perang, kegiatan dakwah dan lain sebagainya. Nah, kita pernah menguasai dunia dan menyebarkan agama Islam begitu intensnya, pernah percaya bahwa Islam adalah agama kita adalah kebenaran. Memang kita masih percaya, umat Muslim sekarang masih percaya bahwa agama Islam adalah yang benar. Agama Islam adalah satu-satunya yang meneruskan sunnah-sunnah atau meneruskan tradisi-tradisi atau ibadah-ibadah, ritual-ritual dari Nabi Ibrahim, Nabi Musa alaihissalam, Nabi Isa alaihissalam, dan kemudian Nabi Muhammad SAW. Tapi kita saat ini terjajah secara kultural oleh nilai-nilai pemikiran-pemikiran dari yang berangkat dari pandangan selain Islam, yang berangkat dari nilai selain Islam. Kemudian pada masa pendidikannya, Malik Bennabi lahir di Algeria, kemudian dia ke Paris, Prancis, untuk belajar, kemudian dia melanjutkan lagi ke Kairo, lalu dia kembali lagi ke Algeria. Salah satu karyanya adalah Les Collections de la Renaissance, yang dimana dia syarat-syarat apa yang membuat Renaissance terjadi. Kemudian dia mempertanyakan kultur, the question of culture, dari Muslim society. Katanya Muslim society, kultur Muslim itu sendiri sudah deteriorate atau sudah menurun dan atau stagnan. Kemudian Malik Bennabi fokus pada kenyataan, ya. Faktanya memang kita modern Muslim society sepertinya sudah sepertinya tidak bisa berpikir outside the mainstream atau outside the conventional atau outside kita tidak bisa berpikir bukan outside ya, kita tidak berpikir menggunakan Al-Quran, values atau nilai-nilai dalam Al-Quran dan nilai-nilai yang disebarkan melalui hadis. Kenapa? Karena kita melihat banyak sekali problem masalah sosial, ekonomi, budaya, dan lain sebagainya yang seakan-akan itu adalah iceberg atau puncak gunung es dari ketidakmampuan kita memahami atau ketidakmauan kita meng-create bonding atau meng-create hubungan dengan Al-Quran. Modern society had left this man hollow due to a stultifying lack of inspiration. Jadi kita lack of aspiration, kita kekurangan atau kita kehausan akan aspirasi. Malik Bennabi juga mengkritisasi Muslim society, masyarakat Muslim, for frequently falling into an apologetic state. Kita tuh sering, oh ya, udahlah nggak apa-apa. Kita lihat aja yang zaman dulu, yang kemarin. Atau kita cukup apa ya? Kita cukup complacent, kita cukup nyaman dengan apa yang ulama-ulama terdahulu telah tuliskan atau wariskan kepada kita tanpa kita mencoba menganalisa situasi yang baru saat ini menggunakan kacamata Al-Quran. Kita seakan-akan tidak mampu untuk menciptakan bonding dengan Al-Quran, dengan hadis, sehingga untuk melihat masalah sosial, ekonomi, budaya yang sangat kompleks dan dinamis, kita kembali lagi ke scripture atau naskah-naskah beberapa ratus tahun yang lalu. Jadi Malik Bennabi menghendaki kita untuk berubah, kita untuk berevolusi, kita harus menghilangkan mental block dalam diri kita sebagai seorang Muslim. Karena apa? Karena menurut Malik Bennabi, he believed that moral paralysis resulted in intellectual paralysis. Jadi kalau kita sudah mental block, kita sudah morally, secara moral, secara ruh, kita sudah paralyzed, kita sudah tidak bisa bergerak, tidak bisa berkembang, maka our intellectual juga, maka critical thinking kita juga akan menjadi paralyzed. So, Malik Bennabi menulis lebih dari 25 buku. Ya. Jadi, jadi 25 buku dari Malik Bennabi itu ditulis di antara tahun 1946 dan 1937. Namun karena Mr. X ya, banyak karya dari Malik Bennabi itu musnah. Nah, ini adalah karya-karya Malik Bennabi. Nah, pada edisi kali ini kita akan membaca. Kita akan mencoba membaca sedikit salah satu karya dari Malik Bennabi, ya. Salah satu karya dari Malik Bennabi yang berjudul The Quranic Phenomenon by Malik Bennabi yang saya akses dari iium.edu.my. This work was not able to see the light normally. Indeed, it is the reconstructions of an original destroyed under special circumstances. Karya ini tidak bisa melihat cahaya secara normal, namun indeed itu bukan namun ya, tapi indeed tapi atau seperti penekanan gitu ya. Namun, tapi, bahkan atau penegasan gitu. Indeed, karya ini adalah sebuah rekonstruksi dari sebuah karya original yang musnah karena situasi-situasi tertentu. We believe we have saved the essential, the development of an analytic method in the study of the Quranic phenomenon. Kita percaya bahwa kita telah menyelamatkan apa-apa yang menjadi esensial atau menjadi penting, yaitu perkembangan metodologi analisis pada pembelajaran fenomena Quran. Practically, this method strives to serve two aims: to give on the one hand the young Algerian Muslim an occasion to meditate seriously on his religion, and on the other, to suggest a timely reform in the spirit of classical commentary. Indeed, it is necessary to realize that in Algeria, as in all Arab countries, the cultural revolution is passing through a phase, the Muslim Renaissance, which receives all its technical ideas from the Western culture, particularly and notably by means of the Egyptian awakening. Metodologi ini mempunyai dua tujuan. Yang pertama, menjadi cara atau memfasilitasi atau memberikan media bagi seorang Algerian Muslim yang muda untuk berkontemplasi tentang agamanya, to meditate seriously on his religion. Aims yang kedua atau tujuan yang kedua adalah untuk orang lain, bahwa saat ini adalah saatnya kita melakukan reformasi in the spirit of classical commentary. Reformasi kepada komentari atau tafsir-tafsir klasik. Tentunya perlu disadari bahwa di Algeria, sebagaimana di seluruh negara Arab, cultural revolution atau revolusi budaya itu melewati fase the Muslim Renaissance, yang mana seluruh ide-ide dari budaya Barat itu diadopsi atau diterima, terutama melalui kejadian atau momentum Egyptian Awakening atau revolusi atau kebangkitan Egyptians atau orang-orang Mesir. These technical ideas not only influence the new material life, which is adapted more and more by young Muslims, they also concern in a less susceptible manner. It is true, the spiritual things of the soul in the spiritual life in a word. Technical ideas ini atau cara-cara technical ini yang mana originnya adalah dari budaya Barat, bukan saja mempengaruhi material life atau kehidupan materi, kehidupan kita sehari-hari, yang mana Muslim-Muslim muda kemudian beradaptasi, mengadopsi. Namun, technical ideas ini juga concern pada spiritual things, kepada spiritual life, pada kehidupan kita, mempengaruhi kehidupan kita sebagai seorang Muslim. In fact, it is amazing. Most of the young Muslims today receive their religious build-up and even sometimes their religious interest by means of the writings of European specialists. The number of Islamic studies which appear in Europe from the pen of eminent orientalists are a fact undeniable. But can one imagine the important place which this type of activity occupies in the movement of modern ideas of Muslim countries? There is in this general crisis an aspect which interests in particular the aim of this study, namely the influence of the work of Orientalists on the religious spirit of our young university graduates, either by bibliographic necessity or by simple intellectual affinity. To refer to some of these Western sources even for personal Islamic information. In fact, the local sources of information are devoid of their cultural treasure, appearing henceforth at the bottom of the national libraries of Europe. Di paragraf ini, Malik Bennabi sekali lagi secara langsung menunjukkan bahwa young Muslim atau Muslim muda hari ini menerima dengan tangan terbuka their religious build up atau menerima dengan tangan terbuka hal-hal yang mempengaruhi religiosity mereka, kesolehan mereka, melalui writings, tulisan-tulisan dari orang-orang di Eropa. The number of Islamic studies which appear in Europe from the pen of eminent orientalists are fact undeniable. Banyaknya Islamic studies atau program-program Islamic studies yang bermunculan di negara Eropa adalah hasil karya dari orientalis. Apakah kita bisa berimajinasi bahwa imagine the important place, ya. Apakah kita bisa berimajinasi bahwa aktivitas-aktivitas seperti ini, pergerakan, movement seperti ini, movement tentang ideas, modern ideas, terjadi di negara-negara Muslim? Tentunya terdapat krisis yang namanya bahwa kita harus selalu mengutip, mereference orientalis dan betul-betul menerima karya-karya dari orientalis tentang religious spirit, tentang religiosity, yang mana bahkan mempengaruhi kita pada level personal. It is curious to note the complacency in Egypt, especially, which helped the most wild ideas coming out of the universities in the West. Unquestionably, the most instructive example in this respect is the hypothesis formulated by an English Orientalist on Jahilian poetry. There would be nothing excessively abnormal if, from the moment of publication, the hypothesis of Margoliouth had not received the keen appreciation from the Arabic reviewers and from certain theses of young Arab doctors. It has even acquired the value of positive criterion, noticeably in the study of Dr. Tesabak on the metaphor in Qur'an. This author systematically refuses from now on to consider the Jahilian poetry as a positive domain of Arab philology. Up to this point, the miracle of Qur'an was based on the major argument of the transcendence of the word of God on the speech of man. Hitherto, the commentary had recourse to the style to prove the miracle of the Qur'an on a rational basis. But in drawing conclusions from the Margoliouth hypothesis, as in the case of Dr. Sabah, it is exactly this basis which would be in error, since then the problem of interpretations of the Qur'an would be posed on an extremely important point for the belief of a Muslim, namely the proof of the miracle of the Qur'an. In any case, the intellectual revolutions would not have lacked to lead our university youngsters to assert, sooner or later, the weakness in the classical criterion which had so far furnished the arguments in favor of the supernatural origin of the Qur'an. For a mind with the Cartesian bent, of what value can be an argument proving hitherto purely subjective? Di sini Malik Bennabi, dalam paragraf ini Malik Bennabi memberikan kasus atau contoh kasus di mana bagaimana Western atau dunia Barat mempengaruhi pemikiran-pemikiran young Muslim doctors, ya, atau studi-studi atau penelitian-penelitian dari Muslim-Muslim muda. Saya lanjutkan paragraf selanjutnya. Indeed, no Muslim, Algerian in particular, could from now on compare objectively a Quranic verse to the period of rhythm or the rhyme of the pre-Islamic era. Long since we have ceased to possess the spirit of Arabic language, to be able to draw a judicious conclusion from a literary comparison. Long time ago, our belief on this point was satisfied by a principle of authority which heartily agrees that the demands of the spirit of the elite hitherto infatuated with positivism. Hereafter, hence, the problem of the commentary is posed a new angle. Karena contoh kasus tadi ya yang Dr. T Sabah tadi, tidak ada Muslim terutama di Algeria, orang-orang Algeria sekarang bisa membandingkan Quran secara objektif antara masa-masa setelah Quran atau masa-masa sebelum Quran, sebelum Islam. Jadi ada rhythm and rhyme of the pre-Islamic era. Jadi rhythm of period of rhythm Quranic verse itu setelah Quran turun, dan the rhyme of the pre-Islamic era sebelum Quran turun. Kita sudah long since we have ceased, atau kita sudah berhenti lama setelah kita berhenti the spirit of Arabic language to be able to draw a judicious conclusion from a literary comparisons. Kita sudah lama melupakan Arabic language ya. Arabic language dijadikan susah, dijadikan foreign dan lain sebagainya. The subject of our study is related partially to this doctrine under the relations of the rational convictions with the intellectual convictions placed first under the aegis of theology. Otherwise, we would like to furnish directly to the necessary rational base for this conviction, at any rate, to open methodically and broadly the religious debate in order to lead Algerian intellectual to build himself this base necessary for his faith. The method followed here is to tie the particular case of Islam to religious phenomena in general, to place its prophet as the ultimate in the chain of prophetic movement, and to place the Quranic doctrine as the outcome of a stream of monotheistic thought. Consequently, this consists of deducing from the Quran, from the phenomenological point of view, an authentic criteria for Islam as a revealed religion. But we cannot neglect to establish the tie dialectically necessary between the chapters of this study to pre-establish a first criteria devoted to the Messenger Muhammad ﷺ, since the second criteria is devoted to the message of the Quran. Such are the outlines of the method which we would like to put at the disposal of the young Algerian intellectual to help him establish the rational basis of his religious faith. Jadi, Malik Bennabi berusaha untuk menggiring kita, pembacanya, untuk menggunakan metodologi ini. Agar kita membangun kepercayaan diri kita dan kemudian membangun faith kita, keimanan kita. Metodologinya bagaimana? Metodologinya adalah untuk to tie ya, untuk kembali lagi, melihat lagi, mengikatkan lagi kasus-kasus kasus-kasus ya, sampai ke religious phenomena secara umum kepada nilai dari Islam. Kemudian kita harus menempatkan Nabi Muhammad SAW sebagai the ultimate in the chain of prophetic movement. Dan kemudian kita harus menempatkan Al-Quran, ajaran Al-Quran sebagai satu-satunya the outcome ya, dari kepercayaan monoteistik. Tentunya ketika kita sudah menempatkan seluruh fenomena, melihatnya dengan menggunakan Islamic worldview, kemudian kita sudah kita menempatkan Nabi Muhammad SAW sebagai the ultimate in the chain of prophetic movement. Kemudian kita menempatkan Al-Quran as the outcome, sebagai satu-satunya outcome dari kepercayaan monoteistik, maka yang akan terjadi adalah kita akan mendapat ketika membaca Al-Quran ya, consists of deducing, kita akan melakukan metode deduksi, bukan induksi melainkan deduksi. Apa yang Al-Quran katakan kita ambil maknanya. Ya. Dan ini akan membuat Islam sebagai agama yang memiliki jawaban dari segala sesuatu. Ya. Tapi kita tidak bisa menafikan bahwa untuk establish atau untuk membangun hubungan ini, kita harus membangun hubungan sebelumnya dengan first kriteria untuk Nabi Muhammad SAW. Karena second kriterianya adalah kepada membangun hubungan dengan Al-Quran. The religious phenomenon that the human conscience face a metaphysical problem thus, and with such regularity at all its phases of evolution, is itself a problem, which the sociologists wish to resolve by characterizing man as essentially religious animal. Yeah. Two divergent theoretical consequences follow from this basically objective definition. A. Is man a religious animal in an inborn instinctive manner as a consequence of an original dispositions of his nature? B. Or else has he acquired this quality by a sort of psychic osmosis propagated by entire humanity, begun by an initial cultural accident which occurred among a group of humans? Precisely these are the two basic theses which arise out of the problem put by the religious phenomena. Of course, it would be naive to strive to resolve this philosophical antagonism by a mathematical solution, as some of our estranged intellectual would wish, probably by an oblivious scientism or by some elementary principles of positive science itself. Be that as it may, once the fundamental principle of a system is established, the system must remain rigorously compatible with it, coherent in all its consequences. Yeah. Now that the Now the two questions which we have just put as a consequence of the religious phenomenon do not expose religion by means of science, as one may tend to believe. Science does not prove the inexistence of God. Not any more we concede it on principle his existence. The debate here is between two religions, between theism and materialism, between the religion which has postulated God and that which has postulated matter. The aim of this chapter is to compare these two philosophical systems that which regards the religious sense of man as an original part of his nature and idea, which is recognized in many aspects as an essential factor of all civilizations, and that which treats religions as a simple historic accident of human culture. And its conclusion would moreover be supported by conclusions from following chapters, which will bring forward also a sort of posteriori proof furnished by the prophetic phenomenon and the Quranic phenomenon, which places religion at the level of a cosmic phenomenon next to physical laws. Jadi fenomena secara religiosity adalah sebagai berikut. Kita digiring untuk percaya bahwa manusia adalah religious animal. Manusia adalah, hewan yang religius. Ya. Tentunya ada pertanyaan, ada dua pertanyaan. Apakah ya seorang manusia adalah religious animal? Kemudian pertanyaan yang kedua, apakah manusia mendapatkan kualitas ini akibat fisik osmosis atau yang disebabkan oleh accident, cultural accident atau kecelakaan atau event-event budaya yang terjadi. Nah, tentunya kita tahu, menyadari ya, seharusnya Malik Bennabi membuat pembacanya, ingin mengajak pembacanya menyadari bahwa kita telah tergiring kepada sebuah sistem, ya, kepada sebuah sistem yang mana kita memisahkan antara sains dengan agama. Ya, kita diajarkan, kita digiring untuk tidak mengekspos agama melalui sains. Karena sains atau ilmu tidak membuktikan, tidak bisa digunakan untuk membuktikan ketidakhadiran Tuhan. Artinya, maksudnya ya sains itu ya tidak ada, tidak bisa. Sains itu adalah outside, sains itu adalah dunia sendiri. Nah, Malik Bennabi ya ingin mengajak kita pembacanya bahwa an essential factor of all civilizations, faktor yang paling penting bagi seluruh kebudayaan adalah religious sense of man. Ada religiosity dalam kita, atau ya di sini dia menggunakan kata-kata religious sense of man atau kesolihan kita, hati kita ya, hati nurani kita, religiosity dalam hati nurani kita adalah the original part, adalah bagian yang kita memang sudah ada, sudah di built in gitu. Jadi Eh, jadi kita tidak bisa memisahkan, ya, tidak bisa memisahkan. Kemudian, ya, the prophetic movement. Ya. In the preceding chapter, we have already established the necessity to of putting simply a postulate. Here, we proceed to examine a particular aspect of monotheism, which, while bringing forth with it from the mouth of prophets, its transcendental proof becomes itself a criterion for the totality of the religious phenomenon. Since Abraham, some individuals moved by an irresistible force had come periodically to talk to people in the name of an absolute truth, of which they were said to have a personal and exclusive knowledge by a mysterious means revelation. These men claimed themselves to be envoys of God, sent to carry this word to the people who couldn't listen to it directly. The exclusiveness of these revelations and the convincing character of the missions of a prophet constituted special aspects of prophethood, which is the essential basis of monotheism and its phenomenological evidence. By the unique testimony of the prophethood appears as an objective phenomenon, independent of the human "me" which expresses it. The problem precisely is to find out whether this is something purely subjective and non-objective phenomenon, as magnetism, for example. The existence of magnetism is shown to us by a lodestone needle, which exhibits qualitatively and quantitatively the specific aspect of magnetism. But we can only establish the prophethood by means of the testimony of a prophet and the contents of the written message he has brought to propagate. Hence the problem is psychological on the one hand and historic on the other hand. It should be remarked that the missions of the prophet is not an isolated fact. It is a continuous phenomenon which repeats itself regularly between two friends of history with Abraham and Muhammad. The continuity of a phenomenon which repeats itself periodically is already useful scientific evidence. To admit the principle, its existence, under the conditions always to verify this by compatible facts with reasons or by the nature of the principle. Now, from the phenomenological point of view, if a case of a particular prophethood explains or establishes nothing, its repetitions under certain conditions justifies the general existence of the phenomenon in a manner already more scientific. Hence it remains to examine seriously the type of this repetition, in order to distinguish its special character from the general law which can control the totality of the phenomenon. One has no valid reason to accept a priori the prophethood as a psychological accident affecting the history of one human being. One has also no reason to claim directly the intervention of a pathological factor to explain the prophethood by the personal equations of the prophet in affirming that it is or it could be due to overexcited nerve or of exalted imaginations or of thought directed by some purely subjective phenomenon. If it were possible for physicists to make a sample of iron pulp under the influence of magnetism, undoubtedly they would be very happy to ask a lot of precise information rather than deducing it all from known facts. or from some hypotheses which are not rigorously supported by calculation. However, the prophet is a subject who can talk to us of his internal state, who even argues it, first of all for his personal conviction and later for the external service of his mission. If there is prophethood, first of all it ought to be considered as the disturbing cause which breathed in human being, the irresistible attractions of a mission, whose motives and aims could not be explained by this means. That is why the knowledge of the phenomena by the prophet himself is essential for a critical study of a subject. Jonas, Jeremiah, Muhammad are such subjects, such who are as much individuals and who at first wished to voluntarily avoid the prophetic call. They resisted, but finally they were carried away by their call. Their resistance emphasizes, however, the polarizations between free will and determinism which bend their will when subjected their means. In these indications there is already a strong presumption for an objective thesis of prophethood. The rational criterion. Muhammad is an illiterate whose very meager knowledge could have come to him only from his material environment. In this chivalrous, idolatrous, and nomad atmosphere, the society and metaphysical problems were never raised. The knowledge of Arabs on the life and thought of other people is insignificant, as can be clearly inferred from the pre-Islamic pottery, which forms in this respect a precise source of information. Hence, while living for his retreat of Guahira, Muhammad could only have the ordinary knowledge of the usual ideas of a primitive milieu. Now the revealed knowledge just shakes up his superficial knowledge, doubtless formed by the general ignorance and the very ummiyah or illiteracy of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it is necessary to visualize the surprising meaninglessness that is expressed in this read, which is the first word of the revelations. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is an illiterate. His order shakes him up naturally, since it is so contrary to his being an ummi. He timidly replies, I can't read. But what a sudden shock for a positive spirit like his! When, at the subsequent revelation, the voice ordered him to preach, he wonders with anxiety, I, who shall believe in me? There is surprise of the unexpected and uncertainty of convictions in this question. Moreover, the revelation is interrupted for some time. He begins to wish for it, even desperately call for it. But the revelation does not come. Muhammad ﷺ finds the worst times of his moral crisis at Cave Hira, Mount Hira. Further from diminishing, his uncertainty increases tragically. He complains to his sweet wife. She tries to console him, but with no avail. Finally, after 2 years, the revelation resumes and brings the supreme and the only consoling expression, the word, to him. Now he has an infinitely more objective certainty on this point, but this long wait, so anguishing, and the unexpected joy which followed it, should be the psychological conditions most favorable to his graceful state of his mind, when there was not any shadow of uncertainty. In fact, it was the extreme uncertainty of Muhammad which obliged him to torment himself and follow the intellectual process which resulted in the final certainty. The literary aspect of the Qur'an. The literary aspect of the message, which was the principal subject of the study for the classical commentators, loses its importance more and less in our time, which is more scientific than literary. In fact, since we do not have adequate material that contains the spirit of pre-Quranic language, we could not judge relevantly the transcendence of the style of the Quran. However, there is a verse carrying historical information of the utmost importance on this point. In this verse, the Quran explicitly claims this transcendence with which it intends to overcome the literary spirit of the period. It throws a stupefying challenge at its contemporaries as follows: bring a single surah similar to this, and ask for the support of men and jinns if you wish. History does not record that this challenge had ever been met. One can conclude from this that the challenge has existed without response, and hence that the literary miracle had effectively overcome the spirit of the particular period. But as far as we are concerned, there are no some other sources leading to a conclusions even on this particular aspect of the question. The Bedouin spirit is essentially music-loving. Its aspirations, its moments, and its progress are all translated in the rhythmic musical expressions of the Arabic verse, whose metre could be as short or as long as the step of a camel. It does not treat any mystical or metaphysical obsessions, and it also ignores the dialectical subtleties and the abstractions of the philosophical, scientific, or religious thought. Its terminology corresponds to the simple requirements of the internal and external life of a Bedouin, and not a shelter, and not of a settler. Such are the characteristics of this Jahiliyyah, idolatrous nomadic language, with the Quran nevertheless bends to its own spirit in order to express a universal thought. Moreover, for expressing this thought, the Quran adapts the form of blank verse, something new in Arabic rhyme. It frees itself from the metre, and it is amplified. Thus, when the Quran was revealed, it was not a progressive evolution for Arabic, but something like a revolutionary explosion, such as philological phenomenon. It is unique in the history of languages. With a single jump, Arabic had become, from its primitive dialectical stage, a language technically organized to carry the thought of a new culture and a new civilization. Thank you so much for watching.